whenever to delete content inside Unity, we can select content, right-click on it, or control-click is the same thing as right-clicking, and we can choose to delete it. Alternatively, what I like to do when I want to delete content is select it in the hierarchy, and on the Mac, you can hold down the Command key and hit delete. If you're on a PC, you can hit the delete key that's in between the keypad and the alphanumeric keys. There's the 6 keys. It doesn't really work on the Mac for some reason, I'm not sure. You have to hit Command and then delete that's in the top right of the alphanumeric side of the keyboard. And that'll delete whatever content you have selected. The reason we have to hold down Command is a lot of times we'll be like, scripting something or naming something, and if everything disappeared every time we hit the delete key, a lot of stuff would go away. So it's just kind of a little safety mechanism. Okay, so I'm going to review really quickly just building the basic geometry. And so I'm going to go to Game Objects, 3D Object Cube. And this is going to represent the paddle that I'm going to use for the basic gameplay. So I'm going to call this paddle, and I'm going to set its position to 0 along the X and 0 along the Z. I'm not so concerned about Y, because Y is going to be above 0. Okay, it's got kind of a strange number, 2.8, and I can move it up and down. But this is the one value that I don't care if it's set to 0. In fact, I want something a little bit higher, but I'll key in a nice round value of 2 or whatever makes sense. I'm going to go to the scale of this, and I'm going to make it a little bit wider. And I can always change this, and I'm just using 5 as the value to get started. That feels a little big. But again, we can change this as we go. And I also want a little bit thinner. It feels very tall, and I kind of want like a little bit thinner of a paddle. I'm just making a really simple pass at this I'm not spending a whole lot of time in the design, but I'm just trying to get a basic kind of sense of scale for this. So I'm going to highlight the Y and type in 0.5. Whenever we have values that can be described with a decimal point, it's called a floating point number. So all that means is that this point can kind of float around. We can have 1.5, or we can simply have 0.5, meaning that point number, it could be 1.542. So that point value can kind of float around a little bit. It could be a very long decimal, a very short decimal, or it could be a whole number, an integer, but it's implied that there's a 0.0 behind it. Okay, and that'll come into play here a little bit later. So this looks pretty good for my paddle. I have some basic materials that are just floating free, and this is not a best practice. Now again, I don't have a whole lot of screen real estate, so we're gonna have to kind of use our imagination a little bit here when I'm jumping in and out of the assets, or kind of just follow along with some of the clicks. I have a couple of materials. They're called ball, new material, something else. So these 3 things represent materials, and then I also have this physics material that I created last week that incorporates the bounce from the physics interaction. I could separate those into different materials, but this is going to be a fairly small project, and so I'm just going to right-click in the root of my folder. Now, most of you are looking at this through a thumbnail view, and there's a little slider down here. You have the screen real estate, I think, to get away with the thumbnail view, and that's fine. But as you get more and more content, there might be value in changing the scale of this, and if you slide it all the way down, it'll turn into a list. So that's what I'm looking at here. I'm going to right-click just in the root of the assets folder here. I'm going to right-click, go to create, and create a new folder. That folder's already been highlighted, and so I'm going to call it materials. That wasn't even close in terms of, got a lot of typos in there. Try that again. Still didn't get it. There we go, materials. And I'm just going to drag the ball material in there. These 2 new materials, those are horrible names, but I can always go back and change them. And I'll even take this physics material that we called bouncy. I'll create a new physics material later. So I'm just making a quick pass in organizing things. So we want to stay organized in terms of the content that we have in our assets folder. And we want to name, whenever we generate content inside our scene or inside our hierarchy, we want to get in the habit of naming content. Even if it's a horrible name, give it a name, because otherwise you're going to have a game that's going to look something like this. As you start creating cubes and spheres for everything to block things out, you're going to end up with a project that looks like this. Okay? And so the only way we're going to be able to figure out what's what is by identifying it in the scene. And that can be very difficult. And if we name things appropriately, there's a little search field up here, and we can say, do I have something called ball? No, I don't. Do I have something named paddle? I do remember creating something called paddle, and there it is. Okay, so as our hierarchies get more complex, we can search for them. And so I'll just go through here and shift click and Command E to get rid of this stuff. Okay, so just a little bit of workflow stuff there. So I have my paddle. I think I want a little depth along the Z. No mysteries here yet, right? All pretty straightforward stuff that we did last week. I'm going to go to game objects and create one more game object. This is a sphere, but I'm going to call it ball. And I'm going to zero out the position. I'm going to hit the tab key to cycle through the X, Y, and Z of the position. I don't want the Y position to be nested at 0. That's in the floor, so I'm just going to grab it by the Y-axis and lift it up. Okay? And because I'm using 0 on the X and 0 along the Z, I know it's aligned just above that paddle. So someone help me out. How did we add the rigid body to make it fall through the air?
You gotta click on it and you have to
Component, physics, rigid body. Okay? And at that point, when I hit the play button, it should fall through the air. I'll give it a quick test. My sphere falls, hits the paddle, there's no bounce, which is okay. We'll fix that in a moment. So I'm going to Command S to save what I'm working on. I want to get a little bounce because that's going to be kind of at the core of my gameplay. Last week we started with a basic bounce physics material. Okay, I'm going to recreate that. In fact, the one I used from last week I've dropped in my material folder, so I'm just going to double click. I'm going to select the bouncy material, I'm going to delete it. You can keep that, but I'm going to make two different bouncy materials this time. One for the paddle and one for the sphere. To create a physics material, just to remind you, I'm now inside my material folder. I'm going to right click, choose to create, and I'm looking for physics material. Not physics 2D material, but just physics material. And so now I have that material. I'll call this bounce ball, and I'm going to increase the bounciness all the way up for now, and I'll dial it back as needed. So I'm going to make a second physics material, and the reason I want two separate physics materials, you might say, okay, I can save myself a few mouse clicks by applying this bounce material to both the paddle and the sphere to get a kind of a double bouncy effect. What might the limitation of that be down the road? Does anyone have any ideas why I wouldn't want to use the same? Not a bad idea if we're just getting started. We could use the same material to see how it works, but why might I want to separate those? So let's do this. I'm going to select the paddle. So when we drag a bouncy material to a game object, we can drag it straight up to the hierarchy. But what we're really doing is we're adding it to the collider's physics material. There's a little field in here. We can just drag it straight in here. Okay, so the paddle now has a bounce. I called it bounce ball. The ball is not bouncy, just the paddle is in this case. And I see I get a little bounce. Not a huge bounce, but I got a bounce. Right now the sphere is not bouncy, but just the paddle. And so I'm going to go to the ball, and I'll take the bounce and I'll drag and drop that directly into the sphere collider physics material. And now I'm going to get that bounce is going to kind of compound. It's going to be bouncier than it was. Okay? Now I'm going to toggle the play button one more time by hitting Command P. If I go back into this physics material, there's some things that I can set. I'm not going to worry about the friction. The bounciness is already maxed out. The bounce combined, though, right now is average. It's averaging a bounce of 1 and 1. Two bits of math. What's the average of 1 and 1? 1. Thank you. What's the average of 0 and 1?
0.
The average? get 0.5, right? It's right in the middle. So we're averaging two different values. It's the same material, but we can change this from average to multiply. We're not going to get much from multiply, but we could maximize this, and we're going to get an increase. That's kind of it's going to compound that bounce, and we should see a little bit more of a dramatic bounce. But the reason that we probably want to use two different materials, I'll go back to average, is that we're going to be able to kind of control and play with these two different values. Right now, we're really stuck with one bounce material. Therefore, if I change it here, if I change this to 0.2, I've just changed the bounce material on both of those. And maybe I want the sphere to be bouncy. Maybe I want, as part of my gameplay, maybe I want like a little power up that changes the bounciness of the paddle to be increased, to give it more power. I want that flexibility. Okay, so I'll toggle the play button. I'm going to change the bounce value back up to 1. Rather than creating a new physics material, I'm going to duplicate this one and just rename it. If I right click on it, I don't see the duplicate function like I do in the hierarchy. I don't know why. If I select it here, maybe it's under edit. Ooh, there it is, duplicate. I don't know why it's not under the right click, but also I like this little quick key of Command D to duplicate things. So I'm going to take that bounce ball and Command D to duplicate, and I'll call this bounce paddle. And I'll just drag and drop that onto my paddle. Now I didn't achieve anything different, but now I can control those two different values differently. I can change these friction settings if I decide that I want to. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Just a workflow standpoint. So I'm making sure that my paddle is selected. And I want to create a state machine so that we can start preparing this thing for the basic interactivity. So I'm going to right click and add an FSM, or a finite state machine. We're going to shorten this simply to SM, state machine. Okay, when we say state machine, we're talking about an FSM. Okay, once I right click, we have our start state, and we always start and then go into state 1. State 1 for this example, I'm going to highlight the title and call it idle. Okay, so I'm actually inside the idle state. I can tell because it's highlighted. And when I look at the state tab, I can see the label of the state. So I'm in good shape. Okay, so I kind of have a chicken and an egg situation here. I can start to describe the other states that I want to go to, or I can start to build the events and the transitions that go out to the other states. And I always like to kind of, think through the logic a little bit on paper to help me kind of, plan things, and then start with the basic interaction so that we can test this. And the basic interaction that we're looking for is a get key down, which is found in the input category. How do I find it if I don't remember what category it's in? Anybody have a little workflow? We can search for it. And I remember that it was get key, so I'll type in get key, and then it's giving me a couple of different options here, and I specifically want get key down. So I'll double click. Now I have a get key down. I know that I need 2 of these, and so while I'm here, I'm just going to double click again, get key down. So now I have 2 instances of get key down. The first get key down I'm going to listen to. I could listen to A and D. That's probably what we did. It's what we did last week, and so I'll listen to that again. So I'm just going to scroll down, and I'm looking for the A key. I'll go down to this one, and I'll scroll down, and I'll look for the D key. Okay, and so when I press the A key, I want to go left. When I press the D key, I want to go right. So for the A key, I want to send an event. I don't have any events. If I click on the drop-down menu, we don't want to use system events, and we don't want to use UI events. Those are custom events, or they're built-in events. We'll talk about those, later in the semester. I want my own custom events, and we can think of these as labels or road signs, just kind of directional devices. I'm going to create a new event, and I'm going to call this left. I'll hit return to create event, and now I get prompted that I have an error. This is showing up red. It's easier to see up on the screen there. I'm also getting this exclamation point in red. So this is telling me that I have a couple of different errors. Last week we fixed the error by clicking on this link, but I would suggest that you kind of understand what Playmaker is specifically looking for, what the logic is specifically looking for. So we're telling the computer not, what to do, not the computer telling us what to do, right? Right now, this is telling us what to do. And while that'll fix the problem, if I click on this, it's equivalent to going to the idle state, right-clicking, adding a transition that we've created. Here it is left. All these are our system events. We'll talk about those. We just want a simple custom event, so I'll hit left. So what we have now is we have get key down. If we press the A key, we want to follow the left event. This is the left event that transitions, but it doesn't go anywhere yet, right? So that we want it to head over to another state. So I'm going to right-click, add a state. This state I'm going to call go left, or going left, going left, whatever. And I'll wire that over. There's some major bugs in this logic, but this is testable. This is something that I can hit play and I can press the A key and see if this event fires. We get stuck in the go left state and we don't have a go right state, so we've got a long way to go to kind of iron this out. But the basic testable logic is there. Okay? I'm going to do the same thing for get key down on the D side of things. I need an event. I don't want to use the left event. I could, but then when either key I press, it's going to follow the left transition, right? So I'm going to create a new event. I'm going to simply call this right. I'll hit return to create that event. Now again, I'm getting scolded by Playmaker. It's saying do this thing. And I might want to say right click, add transition. No, let's add the right transition here. Okay, but I'll take the shortcut just to reinforce what we did last week. I'll click here, it does the same thing. It might feel easier to click on that shortcut, but once our state machines get more complex, we want to be able to manage these a little bit different. So right now, if I want to, I can right click, I can set, some basic parameters. I can move this transition up, so if I want it to show up in different order, it doesn't change the function, but it'll change the organization of our state machines. We'll look at some complex state machines and how complex they can get. But we'll keep this one pretty simple. Here's a little new workflow piece. I need a state over here. And when my state is done, I need to drag this wire over to it, right? That's the whole workflow. Well, instead of right-clicking and adding a state, I can create a wire, and then when I release it, I can have it result in a state. And the way that I'll do that is I'll hold down the command key, and I'll click and drag. Should be the control key on a PC. So if you're using a PC, you result in a state. So it'll just save you a little bit of work if you have a transition that needs to end in a state. And you can see that I can drag these states around and reorganize them. I'll go back to state 1, which is my go right state. Okay. So quality assurance is the name of a role in software and game design. If you're in quality assurance, the role that you're providing is you're finding problems. You're finding problems, bugs in the software, in the user interface. Putting on my quality assurance hat right now, I'm going to hit the play button, and I could press A or D and end up in one of those states. I press the A key, I've released the A key, I'm stuck here. Okay, I got a couple of different bugs happening here. Now it's my job to write the email or the report to the developer or the designer, or maybe I'll just fix it and make a note. But typically, in quality assurance, we're documenting everything and saying, hey, this is broke, and here's what I think it is. So what's the instruction or the report that you would write? What's the suggestion that you would make to fix this error? Yes? Add get key up. And then do what once we have a get key up? Change the vector value. Go on. So let's do this. Let's follow that first step. We're going to do a get key up on the left state. What's the key that we would logically want to listen for? A. Yep. A is our get key down. That's how we got here in the first place. And so we'll listen for get key up. What's the send event that we want to follow? Any suggestions? It's a new one. What should we call it? Reset. I like it. Reset. We'll use the shortcut, even though it's not the preferred method, and we're going to wire this back to idle. Okay. we have a go right. I did most of the heavy lifting of this logic. I did most of the heavy lifting already here. This works, 90% of this works exactly like the way that it should work over here, right? This left key is testable, my right key is still broken, but I can test this. I can press the A key, release the A key. I know that works. It's only one action, but just know, I'm gonna highlight that state and delete it just to share with you a little bit of workflow. I'm gonna select the go left state. I'm gonna Command C to copy. I'm gonna deselect it so it's not selected and Command V to paste. I now have a second instance of the go left state. I'm gonna change its name to go right, okay? Because this logic was essentially the same, I'm just gonna swap the key. I'll wire right over here and reset back, right? So I saved myself a little bit of time. Not a big deal with just one action. You know, I could have done that very quickly, but as our state machines get more complex, we can start kind of using these you know, saving ourselves a little bit of time as we go. So it doesn't do anything right now, right? But if I can test the user input, that's the important thing right now. Okay? Now we'll get it to work. Someone help me out. Remember, what did we do to get our object, our paddle, to move left and right? Does anyone remember what the... Translate? Yep. So we're looking for translate. And translate can be found in the transform category because we're influencing the position. So we could manually look for transform, and now we're looking for translate. It's not a bad idea. I don't really encourage you to search for things unless you absolutely can't remember where you found it, because we should start familiarizing ourselves with what some of the actions are in some of these categories. It can be a little overwhelming at first, but you'll find that there's a handful of actions or commands that we're going to use over and over again, and we're going to use to kind of build up our core logic. And just getting a sense of what's available in here will kind of open up some of the tools that you have for when you need to solve more complex problems. But I'm looking for translate, okay? I was just about to double click translate here, but that would add it to the idle state, which is not what I want, okay? I mean, maybe I do. I could set translate to 0, but it feels like it'd be a little redundant. So I'm gonna go left. I'm gonna double click translate. I'll lift this up so we can see it a little bit better. So I'm looking back in Z space, which is a good thing. This is how we always want to design our games, especially when we're talking about a 2D game. Our Z space is foreground, background. I can see this blue axis is pointing backwards, and I did not rotate the object. So I know that that's in the same orientation as our world axis. So I'm looking at it from the proper direction. Why does that matter? Because I want to figure out which way I want to move this according to the red axis, which is what? What's the red axis? We can use the cheat sheet on the top right-hand corner of our scene view. X, thank you. Positive X is the direction that the arrow is pointing. Okay, this is the orientation of our game. When I hold down the left key, do I want to move positive or negative? What's that? Negative. Negative, thank you. I can't stump you guys at all today. So I'm going to go into the translate. This drop-down menu represents variables. We'll talk about variables in detail today. But I'm just going to toggle this equal sign so that we have a hard value. And I'm going to say -5 for now. I'll go to the go right, I'll double click translate, or I could have copied that action and pasted it and taken off the negative, okay? I'm gonna, on the right side, I'll say positive value, and now I'll hit the play button and I'll see if I set this up properly. So as I go left and right, I'm moving, but it feels super stiff, feels super like kind of clumsy and klutzy, but that's okay for now, I guess, I think, I'm not sure. Okay? Well, we'll fix that.